His forearm crushed her windpipe before she could make a sound. Feet off the ground, back against brick. 3 men, 1 alley, 0 witnesses. Sarah's fingers clawed at his sleeve, but her strength was draining fast, 10 seconds, maybe 15, before the darkness closed all the way in. The whistle around her neck was her only shot. One chance. She got it to her lips and forced out a single broken blast before his hand knocked it away. Somewhere out in the dark, 115 pounds of German Shepherd snapped to his feet, ears up, nose locked, already running. Titan had heard her, and he was coming. If this story hits you, subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next, and drop a comment right now telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The night Sarah Caldwell took that shortcut through Delmont Alley, she had done it 100 times before. She knew every crack in the pavement, every burned-out light, every dumpster that smelled like something had died inside it twice. It wasn't bravery that made her cut through. It was exhaustion. 12 hours on her feet, a double shift at the county animal shelter where she worked as a kennel supervisor. Her lower back had been sending her hate mail since noon, and the idea of walking 4 extra blocks around felt like a personal insult. She didn't notice them until she was already in. 3 men, positioned the way people only position themselves when they have done this before. 1 at the far end of the alley cutting off the exit, 2 flanking her from behind. She heard the footsteps a half second before she understood what they meant, and by the time understanding arrived, it was already too late to run. "Hey!" The voice came from behind her left shoulder. Low, casual. The kind of casual that isn't casual at all. "You got a second?" Sarah didn't answer. She kept walking. Faster. "I said hey. Closer now. We're talking to you." She pulled her phone from her jacket pocket. The man on her left reached out and knocked it from her hand before she could unlock the screen. It skidded across the ground and disappeared under a dumpster. "You don't need that," he said. She stopped walking. Not because she wanted to, because the man at the end of the alley stepped directly into her path and crossed his arms and smiled like this was funny. Like she was funny. Like the fear on her face was entertainment. "Relax," said the man behind her. "We just want to talk." "I don't have anything worth taking," Sarah said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, and she was briefly proud of that. "That's not really what this is about." She turned slowly, measured, the way she'd been trained to move around animals that hadn't decided yet whether they were going to bite. The man who'd spoken was in his late 20s, heavy-set, wearing a gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up. His 2 friends looked younger. Nervous in a way that made them more dangerous, not less. Nervous people don't think. "Then what's it about?" she asked. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Just having a little fun. Long night." "Then go home and sleep it off." The smile dropped. He didn't like that. She saw the shift in him, something tightening behind his face, a decision being made, and she reached for the lanyard around her neck. Not the whistle. She was reaching for her shelter AD. She wanted something in her hands, something to do with her hands, because her hands were starting to shake, and she refused to let them see that. He grabbed her by the arm before her fingers closed around anything. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." "Let go of me." "Or what?" She tried to pull free. His grip was a clamp. The second man stepped around to her right side, cutting off that angle. The man at the exit hadn't moved, just watched. 3 points of a triangle she was trapped in the center of. "There's cameras in this alley," she said. It wasn't true. She had no idea if it was true, but it was something to say. "We checked," the first man said, simply, and that was worse. That was so much worse because it meant this wasn't random. This was planned. They had chosen this place and they had checked the cameras and they had waited, and the person they had waited for was her. "Why me?" she said. The question came out before she could stop it. He tilted his head, looked almost amused. "Why not you?" That was when his hand moved from her arm to her throat. It happened in less than a second. One moment she was standing on both feet, and the next her back was against the alley wall, and his forearm was across her windpipe, and the pressure was immediate and absolute. She couldn't breathe. She could feel the blood thumping in her face. She clawed at his arm with both hands, but his grip didn't budge. He wasn't squeezing with his fingers. He was using his whole body weight, leaning into it, and there was nothing she could grab, nothing she could move. "Easy," he said again, like she was the problem. The second man laughed, a short, sharp sound. Look at her. Stop fighting, the first man said to her, his face inches from hers. You stop fighting, this goes easier. She didn't stop fighting. She kicked, connected with something. He grunted and shifted his weight, and for one terrible second, she thought she might have created an opening, but his grip didn't release. If anything, it tightened. Her vision started to swim at the edges. The whistle. She could feel it against her sternum. The lanyard around her neck. If she could get her fingers to it, if she could just get one breath, but she couldn't. Her fingers were losing coordination. Her hands were going from clawing to grabbing to barely holding on. She had trained Titan for exactly this. She had put 2 years into that dog, 2 years of early mornings and middle-of-the-night drills of building the kind of communication between a handler and her canine that didn't need words most of the time. She had always told herself that if the moment came, she would be ready, that she would stay calm, that she would execute. She had not imagined being unable to breathe. Let her down a little, the second man said behind her attacker now. You're gonna knock her out. That's fine. I'm saying let her down. That's not what we're here to do. There was a negotiation happening over her head about how much air she was allowed to have. That thought arrived with a kind of crystalline clarity that shocked her, the rational part of her brain still running commentary while the rest of her was shutting down. He shifted his grip, not releasing, just repositioning. Her heels touched the ground again. She sucked in a half breath, ragged and raw, and it burned all the way down. There you go, he said. She coughed. Her hands went to her own throat instinctively. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her arm aside. The whistle, the second man said suddenly. He had noticed. Take it. The first man reached for the lanyard. Sarah twisted. She didn't have strength left for much. Her legs were still shaking from the oxygen cut. But she turned her body, put her shoulder into him, and the lanyard pulled taut instead of coming free. Stop. Give it. She bit him, not elegant, not tactical, pure instinct. She turned her head and bit down on the hand that was grabbing at the lanyard, and he swore and jerked back, and she got the whistle to her lips, and she blew it once, one hard, desperate blast before his hand came around and knocked it from her mouth so hard her lips split against her teeth. The sound hung in the alley for a second. Then it was gone. Are you kidding me? He was furious now. The casual was completely gone. Are you seriously? Something's getting to come, she said. Her voice was wrecked, barely above a whisper. Something heard that. There's nothing out here. You don't know that. There's nothing, he said again, and shoved her back against the wall. And you're going to stop making noise. And you're going to stand there and... That was when they all heard it. Distant, moving fast, the sound of something large and determined working through the dark. The man holding her went still. His friend, the one who'd been watching from the alley exit, took one slow step backward. What is that? The second man said. No one answered. Sarah's hand closed around the whistle again. She couldn't get it to her lips. He was still holding her, but she didn't need to anymore. She didn't need to do anything anymore because the sound was getting closer, and she knew that sound better than she knew her own heartbeat, and even standing there with her back against a wall and her throat on fire and her whole body shaking, she felt something shift in her chest that might have been described as relief, but was actually bigger than that. She almost smiled. Let go of me, she said quietly. Shut up. Let go of me right now. I said shut. Titan came around the corner at full speed. 115 pounds of German Shepherd in full drive doesn't look like a dog when it's coming at you in the dark. It looks like a decision that has already been made. He didn't bark. He didn't hesitate. He had located the threat from the sound and the scent and the specific pitch of that whistle blast, and he locked onto the man holding his handler, and he covered the distance in the time it takes to draw a breath. The first man released Sarah the moment Titan left the ground. Not fast enough. The impact knocked him completely off his feet. He hit the ground hard, Titan on top of him, and the sound he made was not a word. It was not language. It was the sound of someone understanding very quickly that the situation had changed. Get it off me! Get it off! The second man moved, not toward Titan, away. He backed into the alley wall, arms up, staring. The man at the exit ran. Titan was in full protection mode, not biting to injure, but holding, controlling, filling the space with noise and weight in absolute authority. The man on the ground stopped struggling. Titan let him know that was the correct decision. "Sarah," a voice from somewhere outside the alley. "Sarah." It was Marcus, her neighbor from 2 streets over, a retired EMT, who walked his beagle at this hour every night, who she had seen 300 times standing under the same streetlight with the same dog and the same terrible flannel jacket. He had heard the whistle. He had his phone in his hand. "I'm in here," she called back, still barely a voice. "I'm okay. Call the police. I'm okay." She said it twice, once for Marcus, once for herself. She straightened up from the wall. Her legs held her. She looked at the man on the ground, then at the one pressed against the wall with his hands raised. "Don't move," she told him. He did not move. She looked down at Titan. "Good boy," she said quietly. "Hold." He held. She reached for the lanyard, touched the whistle. Her hands were still shaking, but her heartbeat was slowing now, finding its way back to something human. She breathed. Once. Twice. Counted the breaths the way she'd learned to count them when a frightened animal was on the other end of a leash and panicking was not an option. The man on the ground said something. Low and angry, the sound of someone who isn't ready to admit what just happened. "Don't," she said, not even looking at him. He went quiet. She looked at the alley entrance. Marcus was there now, phone to his ear, talking fast, giving the address. She nodded at him once. He nodded back. And somewhere between the whistle blast and the moment Titan had come around that corner, somewhere in the seconds where her vision had gone dark and she had genuinely believed she was alone, she had made a decision that she hadn't known she was making, and she wasn't done making it yet. Titan pressed against her leg. She reached down and put her hand on the back of his neck, fingers finding the familiar ridge of muscle and fur, and he leaned into her weight without looking away from the man on the ground, still holding, still doing his job. Sirens in the distance now, getting closer. The man by the wall said, "Look, we didn't actually." "Stop talking," Sarah said. He stopped. She could feel her pulse in her lip where the skin had split. She could feel it in her throat where his forearm had been. She reached up and pressed 2 fingers against the side of her neck and breathed and watched the alley entrance and listened to the sirens and did not take her hand off Titan. The man at the exit had run. She had registered that, filed it away without processing it. He had left his 2 friends. That said something. She didn't know yet what she was going to do with what it said. There was so much she didn't know yet. What she did know was this: she had blown the whistle. Once. For less than a second. Through a split lip and a crushed windpipe in a dark alley with a man's hand around her face. And Titan had heard it. Had found her. Had come. 2 years of training. 2 years of early mornings in cold fields and commands, repeated until her voice gave out and then repeated again. It had been 14 seconds from whistle to contact. She had counted without knowing she was counting, because that is what you do when you have trained long enough. You count, and you measure, and you know. 14 seconds. She had held on for 14 seconds. The first police cruiser turned into the alley, headlights cutting wide and bright, and Sarah Caldwell stood at the center of it and did not flinch and did not move and did not look away, and Titan stood beside her and held until she told him otherwise. The officer who got to her first was young, couldn't have been more than 24. He came in fast with his hand on his holster and his eyes scanning everything at once. And when he saw Titan standing over the man on the ground, he slowed down like someone had pressed a button. "Ma'am, is that dog secured?" "He's with me," Sarah said. "He's fine. Command word is hold, and he's holding. Don't approach the subject until I release him." The officer blinked, looked at her, looked at Titan, looked back at her. You're the victim. I'm the handler," she said. "And yes, both." She gave Titan the release command, one word flat and firm, and he stepped back from the man on the ground and came to her left side and sat. The officer moved in immediately, cuffing the man before he could think about doing anything other than lying still. The second man, the one who'd pressed himself against the wall, didn't wait for an invitation. He put his hands behind his back before anyone told him to. Sarah watched all of it with the kind of detached focus that she recognized on some level as shock doing its job, keeping her functional, keeping her upright, letting the adrenaline burn itself out slowly so she didn't collapse in the middle of an alley in front of 2 cops and her dog. Marcus appeared at her elbow. He'd put his phone away. He was looking at her lip. That needs stitches, he said. It's fine. Sarah, it's fine, Marcus. He handed her a folded square of gauze from his jacket pocket. The man literally carried first aid supplies on a dog walk, which at any other moment she would have teased him about, and she pressed it against her lip without looking at it. A second cruiser arrived. Then a third. The alley that had been silent and empty 10 minutes ago was suddenly very full of voices and radios and the specific organized chaos that follows when law enforcement descends on a contained scene. Someone strung up tape. Someone else was taking photographs. A female officer, mid-30s, dark hair, pulled back name tag that read Delgado, came directly to Sarah and said, "I need you to walk me through everything whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now," Sarah said, because waiting wasn't going to make it easier. She walked Officer Delgado through it, all of it, the footsteps, the phone knocked out of her hand, the hand on her throat. The whistle, she kept her voice level. She stated facts. She did not editorialize, and she did not cry even when the officer's expression shifted just slightly, just once at the part about her feet leaving the ground. "And the dog," Delgado said. "He was loose in the area." "No, he was in my car, parked on Fenwick about a block and a half from the alley entrance. I blew the whistle and he..." She paused. "He came. Your car was locked. It has a modified release on the rear window. Emergency protocol. If he hears the distress signal, he can exit." Delgado wrote something down. "You trained that yourself?" "Yes." "How long have you had him?" 2 years, 4 months. Delgado looked at Titan sitting beside Sarah's left leg with the patience of something that has already made its point for the evening. Impressive animal. "He's the best animal," Sarah said, and her voice for the first time did something it hadn't done through the whole recounting of the attack. It cracked, just at the end, just on the last word, "Idawat." She cleared her throat and looked away. Delgado gave her a second, didn't comment on it. Professional, kind. "We're going to need a formal statement at the station," she said. "Tonight, if possible, while everything is fresh, we can have someone drive you." "I have my car." "Ma'am, you've just been through a significant trauma. Your lip is..." "I know what my lip is doing," Sarah said. "I can drive." Delgado studied her, then nodded once. "Okay, we'll follow you there." It was the man on the ground now, sitting up, zip-tied, being read his rights by the young officer who changed everything. He did it by opening his mouth when he should have kept it closed. He looked at Sarah across the alley with something that was not quite remorse and not quite defiance, and landed somewhere uglier than either, and he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know this isn't done right. You know who you just..." He stopped himself, like he'd caught the rest of the sentence before it left. The young officer said, "Sir, I'm advising you not to..." "I know," the man said. To the officer, not to Sarah. "I know, I'm done." He looked at the ground, but he'd already said enough. Sarah replayed those 6 words the entire drive to the precinct. You know who you just..." What? Who was she supposed to know? Who were these men who had checked the cameras before they chose that alley, who had positioned themselves with the practiced ease of people who had done this before, and who had targeted her specifically because she had been in that alley at that hour on that night? She gripped the steering wheel. Titan was in the back, watching her through the rearview mirror, the way he always did when he knew something was wrong. "I'm okay," she told him. He didn't look convinced. The precinct was fluorescent and crowded and smelled like old coffee and stress. And the detective who took her formal statement was a heavy-set man named Rourke, who had the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything approximately 15 years ago. He sat across from her at a metal table and listened without interrupting, which she appreciated, and when she was done, he flipped back a page in his notes and read something quietly to himself and then looked up. "You said..." He stopped himself mid-sentence, said, "You know who you just..." and stopped. "Yes." "Any idea what he might have been referring to?" "No," Sarah said, "but it wasn't nothing." Rourke nodded, wrote something. "We're running the 2 we have. The third, the one who ran, we've got a partial from one of the men. Should have a name by morning." He set his pen down. "Ms. Caldwell, I have to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Is there anyone in your life who might want to hurt you? Someone with a reason, an ex-partner, a former colleague, someone from your work, from the shelter?" Anywhere. She thought about it honestly, because Rourke was right, this hadn't felt random, and the longer she sat in that chair under those lights, the less she could convince herself that she was the kind of person terrible things just happened to by coincidence. There's one person, she said slowly. Rourke picked up his pen. His name is Derek Voss. He manages a private breeding operation about 40 miles east of the city. We had a run-in about 3 months ago. I reported him to the State Animal Welfare Board for conditions at his facility. The investigation is still open. She paused. He was not happy about it. Threats. Nothing I could prove. A few phone calls with no one on the other end. A note on my windshield that said, "Mind your own business." I filed a report. Nothing came of it. Rourke was writing steadily now. This Voss, does he have resources? People he might hire to? I don't know his operation well enough to say that. A beat. But I know he has money, and I know he has connections. And I know he told me when I walked out of his facility the day I filed the complaint that I was making a mistake that I'd regret. Rourke looked up. He said that to you directly. Word for word, Sarah said. I remember it because I wrote it down in my car before I pulled out of his lot. Something shifted in Rourke's expression. Not dramatically, just a small recalibration, the look of a man who has just upgraded a case from one category to another. I'm going to need that note, he said, and the phone records if you kept them. I kept everything. Good. He closed his notebook. Miss Caldwell, I want you to go home tonight, lock your door, and not go anywhere alone until we've had a chance to follow up on this. Can you do that? I have work tomorrow morning. Can someone go with you? She thought about Marcus, who had given her gauze from his pocket and stood at the end of an alley with his phone already dialing. Probably, she said. Good. Because if Voss is connected to tonight, and I'm not saying he is, I'm saying we need to find out, then tonight may not have been a warning. It may have been an attempt that failed. He said it plainly, without drama. That made it worse. She drove home with Titan in the back, and her hands at 10 and 2, and the radio off. She didn't need noise. She needed to think. Derek Voss, she replayed the day she'd walked into his facility with the welfare board investigator. The cages too small and too cold. The dogs in states she didn't want to think about right now. The way Voss had stood in the doorway of his office, with his arms crossed, and watched her move through his operation, with the specific contempt of someone who has never once been told no and is encountering it for the first time. He wasn't loud about it. He wasn't loud about anything. He was the kind of man who got quiet when he was furious, and that silence had followed her all the way to the parking lot and down the access road and onto the highway, and even then she hadn't quite been able to shake it. She had known he would retaliate somehow. She had not known what somehow would look like. Now she had a better idea. She got home at 12:47, locked the door, engaged the second lock she'd installed 6 months ago after the windshield note, let Titan off his lead and watched him do a slow circuit of the apartment, checking corners, closets, the space behind the couch. He did this every night. It had always been routine. Tonight it felt different. Clear, she asked him when he came back. He sat down in front of her. Clear. She sat on the edge of her couch and put her face in her hands and let herself do for exactly 90 seconds the thing she hadn't allowed herself to do in the alley or at the precinct or in the car. She shook. Her whole body all at once, the way a structure shakes after the force that hit it has already passed. Her throat ached, her lip throbbed, her hands were not steady. Titan put his head in her lap. She put both arms around him and held on. 90 seconds. Then she sat up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, breathed. Okay, she said to him. Okay. She went to her desk and pulled out the folder she kept in the bottom drawer. Photographs from Voss's facility taken on her phone through a fence the day before she'd brought in the welfare board. The written account she'd drafted that same night. The note from her windshield sealed in a Ziploc bag because she'd watched enough true crime to know not to handle evidence with her bare hands. The phone records she'd printed and annotated with dates and times. She spread it all out on her desk and looked at it, and that was when her phone rang. Unknown number, 12:59 in the morning. She stared at the screen for 2 full rings. Titan looked at the phone, then at her. She answered. Silence. The particular quality of silence that has breathing in it. I know you're there, she said. A pause, then a voice, not one of the men from the alley, older, measured. A voice that had spent a long time learning how to say threatening things without technically threatening anyone. Quite a night, Unit said. She didn't respond. I heard there was some trouble, the voice continued. Out on Delmont. You okay? Her grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? You know who this is, Sarah? She did. She absolutely did. She hadn't spoken to Derek Voss directly in 3 months, but a voice like his, smooth and cold, and completely in control of the room it was in, was not a voice you forget. You're calling me at 1 in the morning, she said, after 3 men just attacked me in an alley. I'm calling to check on you, he said. That's all. Neighbors look out for neighbors. Community members look out for each other. I would have thought you understood that by now. The rage came up so fast she almost said something that would have been a mistake. She bit it down, swallowed it, because she understood with perfect clarity that this call was not a check-in. This call was a message. This call was him telling her, without telling her, that he knew what had happened, that he had known immediately, and that he wanted her to understand that the reach of his awareness extended to her front door. Thank you for calling, she said. Her voice was iron. Of course, a brief pause. How's the dog? She hung up. Her hands were shaking again. Different kind of shaking this time. Not fear, not the aftermath of adrenaline. This was anger in its purest form, the kind that burns clean. She dialed Rourke. Voicemail. She left a message controlled and specific, the time, the number, what he'd said, word for word, ending with the question about the dog. That last part, how's the dog, that wasn't accidental. That was Voss letting her know he knew about Titan, knew what Titan had done tonight, knew that her K9 was the reason his people had failed. She hung up and sat very still. Titan was watching her from across the room, now reading her posture the way he always did. She had trained him to respond to distress signals, the whistle-specific commands, physical cues. What she had never managed to fully train out of him was the older, simpler thing, the way he just knew when something was wrong with her before she'd done anything at all to signal it. He crossed the room and pressed his side against her leg. He knows about you, she told the dog quietly. Titan didn't look particularly concerned about that. He thinks that's a threat, she said. She looked down at him, at the folder spread across the desk, at the Ziploc bag with the note inside, at 12 weeks of careful, methodical documentation assembled by a woman who had grown up being told she worried too much and had spent her adult life being proven right. She picked up her phone again. Not to call Rourke, to pull up a name she hadn't called in 8 months. A woman named Priya Suresh, who worked as an investigative journalist at the city paper, and who had on 3 separate occasions told Sarah that if she ever had something genuinely worth investigating, she should call. Sarah had never called because she hadn't been sure. She had suspected. She had documented. But suspicion and documentation are not the same as certainty, and she had wanted to be certain before she handed anything to anyone. She still wasn't certain. But a phone call at 1 in the morning from a man who had just tried to have her silence a call, asking specifically how's the dog, that was the closest thing to confirmation she was going to get without a confession. Her thumb hovered over Priya's number. She looked at Titan. If I do this, she said, it gets bigger, a lot bigger, and he knows where I live. Titan looked back at her with those steady, dark eyes that had never in 2 years communicated anything that could be interpreted as back down. She pressed call. It rang 4 times. Then, this better be extraordinary. It's 1 in the morning. Priya, Sarah said. It's Sarah Caldwell. From the shelter. I know what time it is. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not hang up. A pause, the sound of sheets moving. Someone sitting up. I'm listening, Priya said. Sarah took a breath. 3 months ago, I filed a complaint against a man named Derek Voss, she said. Tonight, 3 men attacked me in an alley on Delmont. And 45 minutes ago, Voss called my personal phone to ask how my dog was doing. Silence on the other end. Then quietly and with complete seriousness, don't touch anything, don't move anything, don't talk to anyone else tonight. I'll be at your door at 7. The call ended. Sarah set her phone on the desk, looked at the folder, looked at Titan, who had relocated to his bed in the corner, but whose eyes were still on her. She had just crossed a line she could not uncross. The question now was not whether Derek Voss would respond. The question was how fast. Priya Suresh showed up at 6:53. 7 minutes early, which told Sarah everything she needed to know about how seriously the journalist had taken the phone call. She was smaller than Sarah remembered, compact, quick-moving, with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a coffee in each hand, and eyes that were already cataloging the apartment before she'd fully stepped through the door. She handed Sarah one of the coffees without preamble, looked at the split lip, looked at the folder spread on the desk, looked at Titan and said, "Walk me through all of it. Don't skip anything because you think it's small. Small is usually where the real story lives." Sarah walked her through it, all of it from the beginning, not just last night, but 3 months back. The tip she'd gotten from a former Voss employee about conditions at the breeding facility. The visit with the welfare board investigator. What she'd seen inside. The formal complaint. The note on her windshield. The silent phone calls. The retaliation she'd felt building like pressure behind a wall with a crack in it. Priya didn't take notes while Sarah talked. She just listened. That was what set her apart from every other journalist Sarah had ever spoken to. She didn't reach for the pen until she'd heard the whole thing because she understood that the story wasn't in the individual facts. It was in the shape they made together. When Sarah finished, Priya picked up her pen. "Voss's facility," she said. "You said you have photographs. Taken from outside the fence line. And the welfare board investigation, it's still open. 3 months and still open. I've called twice for status updates. Both times I was told it was ongoing and they couldn't comment." Priya wrote something. "That's a long time for a straightforward animal welfare complaint." "That's what I thought." "Have you looked into the board members who sits on the oversight committee?" Sarah paused. "No, I reported and I waited." Priya looked up. "That's the first thing I'm going to do today. Because 3 months with no resolution on a case that should have taken 6 weeks, that means either they're building something bigger or someone is slowing it down." She said it without drama, like she was reading a weather forecast. "Either way, I want to know who's in the room." Titan got up from his bed and walked to Priya and put his nose against her hand. She looked down at him. "This is the dog that came through a car window for you." "Modified release," Sarah said. "But yes." Priya scratched behind his ear with the unself-conscious ease of someone who grew up with dogs. 14 seconds, you said. 14 seconds from whistle to contact. Priya shook her head slowly, not performing admiration, genuinely feeling it. "Okay," she said. She put her pen down and looked directly at Sarah. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. If this is what I think it is, if Voss has enough reach to hire 3 men to attack you, to call you 45 minutes later, to signal that he knew and to have a 3-month welfare investigation stalled at the board level, then this is not a local story. This is organized. This is people with money and connections using both to stay untouchable. And the moment my name is attached to any inquiry into his operation, he is going to know." "I know," Sarah said, "and he already knows your name. He already knows your address. He already knows about Titan." Priya paused. "Do you have somewhere else you can stay?" Sarah thought about Marcus 2 streets over with his beagle and his gauze pads, and his immediate instinct to call the police before she'd asked him to. She thought about her sister in Reedstown, 40 minutes away, who had a guest room and a husband who was 6'3" and an ex-Marine. She thought about the second lock on her front door. "I'll figure something out," she said. "Figure it out today," Priya said. "Mas has a suggestion." After Priya left, Sarah called Rourke. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd already been at his desk, which meant the case had already moved up someone's priority list. "Ms. Caldwell, I was going to call you at 8. I have something." "So do I," she said. "You go first." "The third man from the alley, the one who ran. We have a name, Brendan Galt. He has a prior for aggravated assault, did 18 months, been out 14. Here's where it gets interesting." He paused. "Galt works part-time as a handler's assistant at a private dog breeding and training facility about 40 miles east of the city." The line went quiet. "Voss," Sarah said. "Derek Voss's property, yes." She sat down, not because her legs gave out, deliberately, because she needed to be sitting down while she processed the fact that one of the men who had been in that alley with his hands around her throat was a direct employee of the man who had called her at 1 a.m. to ask about her dog. "That's not coincidence," she said. "No," Rourke agreed. "It's not. And here's the second thing, Galt has a sealed juvenile record. I can't access it without a judge's order, but my sergeant knows the prosecutor who handled his adult case, and off the record, she told him that Galt was involved as a minor in an intimidation for hire situation. Someone paid him to deliver messages. A beat. Physically. Voss paid him. I can't say that yet, but I can say that Galt's connection to Voss's facility puts us in a position to request warrants. His voice was careful, professional, but she could hear something underneath it, the contained energy of a detective who has just watched a case become a real case. I need you to come in this morning. Bring everything you mentioned in your voicemail. I'll be there by 9, she said. She hung up and looked at Titan and said, Galt works for Voss. Like she needed to hear it out loud to make it fully real. Titan watched her. One of the men who had his hands on me works for the man who called me afterward to ask about you. He tilted his head, a small movement, the gesture that after 2 years she had learned to read as him, tracking her emotional register and deciding whether it required action. Not yet, she said, but we're getting closer. She arrived at the precinct with the folder under her arm and Titan on his lead because she was not leaving him in the car, and Rourke, to his credit, did not ask her to. He looked at the dawn, looked at the folder, poured her a coffee without asking, and sat down across from her with his sleeves already rolled up. She put everything on the table. The photographs, the written account, the note in the Ziploc bag, the printed phone records, the voicemail she'd somehow had the presence of mind to save from one of the silent calls, 32 seconds of breathing recorded and dated. Rourke went through it piece by piece. He didn't rush. He handled the Ziploc bag by the edges. When he got to the phone records, he spent a long time on one particular page, long enough that Sarah said, "What, this number?" he said, pointing, without touching. "These 4 calls on the same day, about a week after you filed your complaint. You noted them as unknown. They all showed up as blocked." "I know this number," he said quietly. "Not from memory, from a case." He looked up. 3 years ago, there was an investigation into a contractor who was using paid intimidation to resolve business disputes. The case fell apart when the complainant withdrew her statement. 2 of her witnesses also withdrew. He paused. This number was connected to a man named Ray Colton, worked as a, let's say, a private problem solver. The kind people hire when they want something handled without documentation. "Voss hired him," Sarah said. "I don't know that yet." "But you think it." Rourke pressed his lips together, set the page down. "I think that if Derek Voss retained Ray Colton's services at the same time you filed your animal welfare complaint, and if Brendan Galt, a man with a history of paid intimidation who currently works on Voss's property, was one of 3 men who attacked you in a dark alley, then we have enough to request a warrant for Voss's financial records. How long does that take? If I walk it to the right judge today, 48 hours, maybe less. And in 48 hours, you don't go anywhere alone," he said. "That's not negotiable, Ms. Caldwell." She held his gaze. "My name is Sarah." He nodded once. "Sarah, don't go anywhere alone." She was back at her apartment by noon, the folder gone properly into evidence now, with copies she'd made that morning at the print shop 2 blocks over before driving to the precinct. She wasn't sure when she'd started thinking like this. Making copies before handing over her originals, saving voicemails, dating written accounts the night she wrote them, but it was the kind of thinking she was glad she'd developed, because somewhere in the past 3 months, it had shifted from cautious documentation to the foundation of a criminal case. Her phone rang at 12:40, not an unknown number this time. "The welfare board," she answered. "Ms. Caldwell, this is Patricia Hale. I'm the administrative coordinator for the State Animal Welfare Oversight Committee. I'm calling regarding your complaint filed against Voss Premium Kennel and Breeding." "I've been waiting 3 months for a call back," Sarah said. A pause. "Yes, I understand. I need to tell you something, and I want to be clear that this is not an official board communication. This is me personally calling you." Another pause longer. The sound of someone making a decision they've been deliberating for a while. "The investigation into Mr. Voss's facility has not been progressing because there is a board member, I'm not going to say the name on this call, who has been actively stalling it, requesting additional procedural steps, raising questions about the validity of your complaint sourcing, creating delays that shouldn't exist." Sarah stood very still. "Why are you telling me this?" Because I've worked for this board for 11 years, Patricia said, and her voice was steady but thin, the voice of someone who has been holding something back for too long. And because you called twice for updates, and both times you were polite and patient, and you didn't threaten or complain, you just asked, and I looked at your file, and everything in it was correct and documented, and the photographs alone should have been enough to... She stopped, collected herself. Someone is protecting Voss on this board, and I don't know what else is happening outside this office, but I know what's happening inside it. And I thought you should know. Patricia, Sarah said carefully, I need to ask you something. This board member, would they have known about the investigation's timeline, known when it was stalling publicly? Yes, they receive all status reports. Would they have known my contact information? My address? A silence that stretched long enough to have weight. All complainants' contact details are in the file, Patricia said quietly, which the full committee has access to. The air in the room felt different after that, thinner. Are you in a position to document what you've told me? Sarah asked. I've already started, Patricia said. That's why I called you first. I wanted you to know before I went to anyone official, because once I do, it's going to get loud. It's already loud, Sarah said. Go today. The call ended. Sarah stood in the middle of her apartment with the phone in her hand and the specific feeling of something that has been hidden beginning to surface the way a shape you couldn't quite make out resolves into something recognizable when you get close enough. Derek Voss wasn't just a man with money who'd sent 3 thugs after her because she'd reported bad conditions at his kennel. He was a man who had board-level protection, who had a career intimidator in his contact list, who had a direct employee present at her attack, who had called her personally at 1 a.m. because he had wanted her to know exactly how far his reach extended. This was not about one complaint. This was about what would happen if that complaint succeeded, about what an open investigation might find if it was actually allowed to look. She called Priya. I was just going to call you, Priya said without greeting. I've been on the board's public records for the past 2 hours. One of the oversight committee members, a man named Gerald Fitch, has voted to delay or defer every significant animal welfare investigation that's come before the committee in the last 4 years. Every single one. I went back and cross-referenced the affected facilities. A brief pause. 3 of them are Voss-affiliated operations, 2 under his name, 1 under a subsidiary. Patricia Hale just called me, Sarah said. Who's Patricia? Administrative coordinator for the board. She says Fitch has been actively stalling my complaint. She's going official with it today. The sound of Priya exhaling, long and controlled, the breath of someone who has just confirmed something they suspected and is now deciding how fast to move. This is bigger than a kennel, Priya said. If Fitch is on Voss's payroll, if we can prove that a regulatory board member is taking direction from the subject of an open investigation, Sarah, that's not an animal welfare story. That's corruption. That's a front-page story that doesn't stay local. I know, Sarah said again. And Voss knows that too, Priya said, which means last night wasn't the end of what he's willing to do. It was the beginning. Sarah looked at Titan. He was watching her from across the room, still patient, reading her the way he always read her, tracking something in her posture or her breathing that no one else would have noticed. She had spent 2 years training him for the worst-case scenario. She had built the car release and practiced the distress signal and put in the hours and the repetitions because she had always believed on some level that the world had a version of worst case in it with her name on it. She just hadn't known it would have Voss's name on the other side. I'm calling Rourke, she said to Priya. He needs to know about Fitch before he goes to the judge for the warrant. Do it fast, Priya said, because I'm publishing something preliminary tonight. Nothing that names sources, nothing that exposes you, but enough to start the pressure. If Voss feels the ground shifting, he is going to move. And if he moves, he makes mistakes, Priya said. That's what pressure does. It makes careful people careless. Sarah hung up and dialed Rourke. He picked up immediately. We have a problem. Wayne, she said. Tell me. The Animal Welfare Board has a compromised member, Gerald Fitch. He's been running interference on the Voss investigation for 3 months. An insider at the board is going official with it today, and a journalist with the city paper already has the public records to support it. Silence on Rourke's end, the specific kind of silence that precedes a significant recalculation. This journalist, he said slowly, how long has she been on this? Since 6:50 this morning. Another pause. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The moment this goes public, even partially, every piece of leverage we have in this case becomes a clock. Voss will know we're building. His lawyer will know. Fitch will know. And anyone else in his network who hasn't been identified yet will start covering their tracks. I know, she said. That's why I'm calling you right now. How fast can you get back here? She was already reaching for her jacket. 20 minutes. I'll have someone meet you in the lobby. A beat, and bring the dog. She stopped. You want Titan at the precinct? If what you've just told me is accurate, I don't want you going anywhere without him. That includes my building. He said it without apology. 20 minutes. She grabbed the jacket and the leash and looked at Titan, who was already on his feet, already at the door, already 2 steps ahead in the way that he was almost always 2 steps ahead, because she had built him that way, had shaped his instincts through 2 years of deliberate work, and in doing so without entirely meaning to, had also built herself into the kind of person who didn't flinch, who documented, who called the journalist and the detective and the insider on the same morning, who moved toward the thing instead of away from it. The door clicked and shut behind them. Outside, the day was ordinary and indifferent. People walking, cars moving, the city doing what cities do, which is proceed without awareness of the individual crises taking place within it. Sarah walked to her car with Titan beside her and her jaw set and her lips still swollen, and 3 months of documentation in the hands of people who knew how to use it, and she thought about what Priya had said. Pressure makes careful people careless. She thought about the phone call at 1 a.m, the casual cruelty of it, the performance of control from a man who believed he was untouchable because until now he had been. How's the dog? Fine, she said out loud to no one to the street, to the version of Derek Voss who thought that question was a threat. He's just fine. Titan looked up at her as she opened the car door. She looked back at him. Let's go, she said. Rourke had 4 people in the room when Sarah arrived. That told her something. The day before, it had been just him and a metal table and a notebook. Now there was a woman in a suit she didn't recognize, a younger detective she'd seen in the hallway. The first night, a man in plain clothes who had federal written all over him without a single visible credential, and Rourke standing at the head of the table with the look of someone who had not slept and was not planning to until this was done. Sit down, he said, not unkindly. There have been developments. She sat, Titan settled at her feet. The woman in the suit looked at the dog and said nothing. The federal-looking man looked at the must and then at Sarah with an expression that recalibrated slightly upward from whatever he had been expecting. This is Agent Dana Merritt, Rourke said, indicating the woman. She's with the State Attorney General's Office, Financial Crimes Division, and this is Detective Hines, my partner on the case as of this morning. He did not introduce the plainclothes man, which confirmed her rating on him. What you're about to hear does not leave this room. Understood, Sarah said. Derek Voss has been on a watch list, Merritt said. She had the flat, efficient delivery of someone who had given this kind of briefing before. Not ours. A federal task force looking at a network of private animal operations being used to move money. Illegal breeding and sale revenue structured to avoid reporting thresholds filtered through what appear on paper to be legitimate agricultural businesses. Voss's facility is one of 7 in a 3-state area believed to be connected. Sarah heard all of the words, processed them in sequence. You've known about him. We've known about the network. We had not yet confirmed Voss's involvement to the evidentiary standard required to move on him. Merritt paused. Your welfare complaint changed the pressure dynamics. When you filed, Voss began moving in ways that were detectable. The phone contact with Colton, the activity on Galt's accounts, 2 cash deposits in the week before the attack. And the call to your phone at 1 a.m, which whether he knew it or not, was placed from a number associated with a secondary identity he uses for certain transactions. He called me from a burner that's already in your system, Sarah said. From a burner tied to a shell entity, yes. Something that was almost a smile crossed Merritt's face. It was a mistake, not a large one. But in this kind of case, small mistakes are what you build on. Rourke leaned forward. Sarah, The warrant for Voss's financial records came through 40 minutes ago. We also have a warrant for Fitch's communications phone and email going back 18 months. Patricia Hale's formal statement was filed this morning, and it is detailed. He let that land. But here's the problem. Voss has a lawyer, a good one. He was notified of Galt's arrest last night, and he's been moving since then. This morning, Galt was transferred to a private medical facility. His attorney claims he sustained injuries during apprehension that require evaluation. Titan didn't injure him that seriously, Sarah said. No, he didn't. This is delay strategy. Keep Galt away from formal questioning for as long as possible while the legal team constructs a narrative. Rourke straightened. We have a narrow window. If we can get to Galt directly before his attorney completes the wall around him, there's a chance he talks. Why would he talk? Because Galt has a daughter, said the plainclothes man. His first words, a voice like gravel. Everyone in the room registered the shift. 8 years old. Her mother has primary custody. Galt pays support barely and has supervised visitation twice a month. If he goes back to prison on this, he loses the visitation permanently under the terms of his prior agreement. You'd use his daughter, Sarah said. We'd use the truth, the man said. The truth is that if he gives us Voss, his exposure on the attack charge gets managed. That is not a fabrication. That is a real offer. Sarah looked at Rourke. Is that offer real? Yes, Rourke said. The DA confirmed it an hour ago. Galt cooperates, we can get him to a plea that keeps him out of prison. He doesn't, he goes back in and doesn't come out for 7 to 10. She sat with that for a moment, thought about the man on the ground in the alley, thought about the way he'd said stop fighting like she was the one creating the problem, thought about his daughter who was 8 years old and had nothing to do with any of this. When do you approach him? She asked. This afternoon, before the medical hold formalizes. Rourke looked at her steadily. You're not part of that conversation. What I need from you is to stay accessible, stay safe, and stay out of reach of Voss for the next several hours. Can you do that? My sister's in Reedstown, she said. I can go there. Good, go there now. He stood. Detective Hines will follow you to the city limits. Once you're on the highway, you'll have a contact number for the Reedstown PD. They're already informed. She stood. Titan stood with her. Merritt was already on her phone turned toward the wall. The plainclothes man had opened a laptop and was typing. The room had shifted from briefing to operation while she was still absorbing what the briefing had contained. At the door, she turned back to Rourke. The animal welfare piece, she said. The conditions at Voss's facility. The deeks. It felt important to say, to make sure someone in that room with jurisdiction and warrants and federal backing hadn't lost track of the thing at the center of all of it. Whatever comes out of the financial investigation, those animals are still in those conditions right now today. Rourke held her gaze. Animal control has been notified. They're staging for entry pending the warrant execution. A pause. I didn't forget. She nodded. Okay. She was 40 minutes outside the city, Hines's cruiser a shrinking shape in her rear view when her phone rang. Priya. Don't publish yet, Sarah said immediately. I know, Priya said. Rourke called me. He was very polite about it and very clear. I'm holding for 12 hours. She paused. But Sarah, I need you to know something. While I was pulling records this morning, I found something that wasn't in the board files. It was in a property database. Voss purchased a second property 6 months ago, 8 acres rural outside county zoning oversight. He hasn't filed any use permits for it. What does that mean? It means we don't know what's on it. And in the context of everything else, the money movement, the network, the fact that he breeds dogs professionally, I think someone needs to look at that property. Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel. I'm sending you Rourke's number. I already have it. I wanted to tell you first. A beat. Because if that property is what I think it might be, if it's where the real operation is, the one the Financial Crimes Unit has been trying to locate, then what you did by filing that complaint didn't just save yourself. It potentially saved a lot of animals that nobody knew to look for yet. Sarah said nothing for a moment. Call Rourke, she said quietly. Right now. She arrived at her sister Dana's house at 2:15. Dana opened the door before Sarah's hand reached for the knob she'd been watching from inside. And the first thing she did was look at the split lip and the bruising starting to develop along Sarah's jaw and put both arms around her without saying anything at all, which was exactly right. What was needed, the kind of response that only people who have known you your whole life know to give. "You're okay," Dana said, into her shoulder. "I'm okay," Sarah confirmed. "Is the dog okay?" "He's perfect." Dana pulled back and looked at Titan with an expression that landed somewhere between awe and profound gratitude. "You," she said to him very seriously, "are getting the best cut of whatever I'm making for dinner." Titan accepted this with dignity. They sat at Dana's kitchen table with coffee and the particular forced normalcy of people trying to give each other a rest from something that isn't resting. Dana's husband Cal came in from the back and shook Sarah's hand and said, "We've got you," and man it, and then made himself scarce, the way good people make themselves scarce when they understand that a conversation doesn't need them in it. "Tell me what happens now," Dana said. "Now I wait," Sarah said. "Rourke is moving on Galt this afternoon. If Galt talks, they can go to Voss directly. If he doesn't," she stopped, "if he doesn't, then we go at it from the financial side, which takes longer." She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "And Voss knows how to wait." Dana was quiet for a moment. "You filed that complaint knowing he might push back." "I filed it because the dogs needed someone to, Sarah said. "I didn't know how far he'd push." "But you kept the documentation." "Yes. You saved the voicemails. You made copies before you handed over originals." "Yes." Dana looked at her for a long time. "You were scared," she said, not a question. "Every single day since I filed it," Sarah said. "I was scared every single day. But you kept going." Sarah looked at Titan, who was under the table with his head resting on her foot. "I had company," she said. Her phone went off at 4:47. "Rourke." "Galt talked," he said. She exhaled, slow and complete. "All of it. Enough. He confirms Voss hired Colton. He confirms Colton subcontracted to him and two others. He confirms the target you was specified by Voss directly by name and photograph." Rourke's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. The particular frequency of a case breaking open after too long under pressure. "He also told us something we didn't have." "The property," Sarah said. A pause. "Priya Suresh is either very good or very lucky." "Both," Sarah said. "What's on it?" "We don't know yet. We're executing the warrant on Voss's financial records simultaneously with a welfare inspection of the second property. Both start within the hour." A beat. "I need you to stay where you are until I call you again. This is the part where things move fast, and I cannot be managing your location at the same time." "I understand," she said. The one more thing. Voss's attorney filed an emergency motion this morning, arguing that the welfare board complaint was submitted in bad faith and should be dismissed. He cited 3 procedural irregularities." Rourke paused. "All 3 were created by Fitch. He's trying to kill the complaint using the delays Fitch manufactured." "Yes." "The judge denied the motion an hour ago. Fitch's communications were in the warrant returned by then, and the judge had seen them." Another pause. "Gerald Fitch resigned from the oversight board at approximately 3 this afternoon. His resignation letter cited personal reasons." Sarah let out a short, hard sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "He's running," she said. "He's not going far. His passport has been flagged." She stood up from the table. Dana looked at her across the kitchen, reading her face the way older sisters read faces, and raised her eyebrows. Sarah held up one finger. "One moment. Rourke," she said. "The dogs at the facility, the ones in the original complaint. What's happening with them?" "Animal Control executed entry at Voss's primary facility at 3:30. 16 animals, all removed. The conditions are being documented by the welfare board separate from Fitch's oversight, and the documentation will be part of the criminal case." He stopped. Then, quieter. "Sarah, it was bad." "I know," she said. "I saw it. You were right to file." "I know that too," she said. "I just needed someone official to say it." The next 2 hours were the hardest kind waiting, with full knowledge that something significant was happening somewhere you weren't. Dana made dinner, and Cal set the table, and Titan ate the good cut of meat that had been promised to him, and Sarah sat with her phone in front of her and her food mostly untouched, and her mind running every possible version of what was happening on the other end of the two warrants being executed simultaneously 40 miles away. At 6:12, Priya sent a text word from source that second property has structures. Multiple, not agricultural. Stay close to phone. Structures, not agricultural. She stared at the words. What is it? Dana asked. I don't know yet, Sarah said, but it's something. At 7:04, Rourke called. We're on scene at the second property, he said. Sarah, I need to prepare you. Tell me. There are 3 structures. 2 appear to be holding facilities, animal kennels, but built for scale. Beyond anything a private breeder would need. Capacity for 60 to 80 animals. We're finding records on site. He paused. Breeding records, sale records, and transfer manifests. Animals moved through at least 4 states over the past 3 years. Some of the records of the health and condition documentation they're falsified systematically. The animals being sold were not in the condition the paperwork represented. He was selling sick animals, Sarah said, to buyers who thought they were buying healthy ones. In volume, Rourke said, and across state lines, which turns this from a state welfare issue into a federal issue. He paused. The financial crimes unit is on site now alongside our team. What's here matches the money movement patterns they've been tracking for 18 months. This was the source, Sarah said quietly. This property. This is what the network was built around. It looks that way, and we wouldn't have had the probable cause to locate it without the warrant. And we wouldn't have had the warrant without the complaint, she said. Yes. She sat down, slowly. On the edge of Dana's couch in the lamplight with Titan pressing against her leg before she'd even fully landed. She thought about this day she'd stood outside Voss's primary facility and taken photographs through a fence because she hadn't been able to get inside. She thought about the way she'd felt certain something was wrong, uncertain whether anyone would listen, afraid of exactly the kind of retaliation that had found her in that alley. She thought about the 100 times in 3 months she'd almost convinced herself that she was overreacting, that she should let the board handle it, that the note on her windshield was just a scare tactic from an angry man and not a signal of something larger. She had filed a complaint anyway, she had documented anyway, she had called Priya anyway. Rourke, she said, what about Voss? Derek Voss was taken into custody at his primary residence at 6:48 this evening. A pause. He did not resist. His attorney was present and made 3 statements in approximately 30 seconds, and then stopped talking, which usually means the attorney has just seen something that tells them the situation is worse than the client reported. Good, she said. There will be a formal interview in the morning. You may be asked to be present, not in the room but available. Is that possible? Yes. And Sarah, the DA, is going to want a full statement from you, not just about the attack, about the complaint, about everything leading up to it. Every conversation, every piece of documentation, every date and sequence of events you can recall. He paused. You've kept good records. I kept everything, she said. I know. That's why this case has a future. He paused once more. Go get some rest. The next few days are going to require you at full capacity. She set the phone down. Dana was watching her from the kitchen doorway. Cal had appeared silently somewhere behind her. Even Titan had shifted, sitting up now, instead of leaning, reading the change in her posture with that precise animal intelligence that she had trained and that had in return trained her. He's in custody, she said. Dana closed her eyes. Opened them. Okay, she said softly. It's not over, Sarah said immediately. Because it wasn't. She was clear-eyed about that. There was a trial ahead and attorneys and the long machinery of the justice system grinding through everything she had built toward over 3 months. Voss would fight. He had the resources to fight for a long time. Fitch would try to negotiate. Colton would lawyer up. The network they'd built across 4 states would not come apart in a single evening. But the foundation of it had just been pulled. She reached down and put her hand on Titan's back, felt the familiar ridge of muscle and fur beneath her palm. He turned his head and looked at her, steady and direct, no ambiguity in those dark eyes, no performance, just presence. She thought about the alley, about the moment her feet had left the ground and her vision had started to go, and she had known with the specific clarity that arrives in extremity that she had one option left. One signal, one chance, and she had used it. Barely, with the last coordination her hands had in them. 14 seconds. She had built 14 seconds worth of response into an animal, and that animal had built it into a relationship, and that relationship had built it into this sitting in her sister's living room with the man responsible in handcuffs and 2 facilities worth of evidence in the hands of people with federal jurisdiction and a journalist with all the documentation she needed to make sure none of it stayed quiet. "You hungry?" Cal asked from the doorway. She looked up. "Actually," she said, "yeah, good." He disappeared back into the kitchen. The sound of something going onto the stove. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. Dana sat down next to her. Not close enough to crowd, just nearby. The way family does when they understand that you don't need words, you just need the weight of another person in the room reminding you that you're not alone. Sarah leaned back, let out a long breath. Titan put his head in her lap. She had a call with Rourke in the morning, a statement to give. Months of process ahead. She understood all of that. But tonight, she sat in the lamplight with her hand on her dog and her sister beside her, and the knowledge that she had done the thing, the hard, documented, terrifying, keep going anyway thing, and that it had mattered. More than she had known when she started. Her phone lit up. A text from Priya 12 hours is up at 7 a.m. I'm publishing. "You ready?" Sarah looked at it for a long moment. Then she typed back, "Ready." Priya's article went live at 7:03 in the morning. By 7:15, it had been shared 400 times. By 8, the city paper's website had crashed twice from traffic volume. By 8:32, national news outlets had picked up the story and were running their own versions, and Priya's phone, which Sarah could hear buzzing continuously in the background during their brief call, had stopped ringing individually and started ringing in what sounded like a single sustained tone. "It's moving," Priya said, understatement of the year. "How much did you put in?" Sarah asked. "Everything I could prove. The board corruption, Fitch, the second property, the financial network, the attack." A pause. "I named you. I know we discussed keeping you background, but Sarah, your name is already in the police report, and the moment Voss's attorney starts the public narrative, you need your version out there first. I made that call. Tell me if I was wrong." Sarah thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "You weren't wrong." "Good, because it's already out there." She was back in the city by 9. Rourke had called while she was on the highway and asked her to come in, and his voice had the particular quality of someone managing too many moving pieces at once, but holding the center steady. She found him in a different room, this time larger, more people, a whiteboard covered in names and connection lines that she studied for a moment before he handed her coffee and pulled her attention back to the table. "Voss's attorney is requesting a delay on the formal interview," Rourke said. "We expected that. We're not granting it. The interview proceeds at 10. "What does he know we have?" "His attorney knows about the financial warrants and the Galt cooperation. He does not know yet the full scope of what was found at the second property." Rourke paused. "We're going to show him this morning." "Why now? Why not build longer?" "Because there's a 5th member of the network we haven't been able to place," said Agent Merritt from across the table. She looked like she'd slept less than Rourke and cared about it less than him. Someone above Voss in the operational structure. The money flows through Voss's entities, but it flows somewhere before it gets to him. Someone is upstream, and right now that person doesn't know how much we have. If we wait too long, they'll know we're looking, and they'll move. "You want Voss to give you the person above him?" Sarah said. "We want to give Voss enough information that he understands his only path forward is cooperation." Merritt picked up a coffee cup, found it empty, set it down with the resignation of someone long past caring. "His attorney is good, but the evidence is better." Sarah sat back. "Is there anything you need from me this morning?" "Your written statement on the full timeline complaint through last night needs to be finalized and signed before noon. That goes to the DA's office as foundational documentation." Rourke slid a form across the table. "We already have the rough version from your precinct interview. This is the formal version. Read it carefully before you sign." She read it carefully. All 11 pages. She corrected 2 dates and 1 sequence of events where the transcription had transposed the order, and she signed it and handed it back, and Rourke looked at the corrections and said, "Good catches," or with the tone of someone making a note about the quality of a witness. She was in a waiting area outside the interview Farvian at 9:50 when she heard him. Derek Voss being walked from a holding area by 2 officers and his attorney, who was talking in a low and continuous voice that functioned like white noise, steady, uninterruptible, a professional buffer between his client and reality. Voss was in different clothes than whatever he'd been wearing at his home the night before. Someone had brought him something. His hair was neat. He walked like a man who had decided that the way he carried himself in this building was itself a statement. And then he saw Sarah. He stopped walking, not dramatically, just a half-step arrest, a small hesitation like a word caught behind teeth. His attorney touched his elbow. Derek. Voss looked at her. She looked back. She did not look away, and she did not look down, and she did not move any of the muscles in her face that she didn't choose to move. He looked at Titan sitting at her left side. Then he looked at the floor and kept walking. His attorney glanced at her as they passed. She held his gaze too, and he looked away first, and that told her something about how he assessed the situation they were all in. Rourke appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later. Did something happen, Boyd? No, she said. He just saw me. And he looked at the floor. She paused. He's scared. Rourke absorbed that. Good, he said simply. She was not in the interview room. She understood why, and she agreed with it. Her presence would have given the attorney an objection to work with, and Rourke didn't need objections. He needed answers. She waited. She drank bad coffee from a machine in the hallway. She walked Titan in a small circuit outside the building twice, and both times when she came back in, the desk officer who'd been watching the front nodded at her like she was someone. Like she was part of the building's operation, which was not a thing she'd ever expected to feel in a police precinct. At 11:40, Rourke came out. She read him before he spoke. Something had shifted, not relief exactly, because relief implies the end of tension, and this wasn't that. Something closer to resolution. The look of a man who has just placed the last piece of a structure he's been building and can now see the full shape of it. He gave us a name, Rourke said quietly, the person upstream. A man named Lewis Carver. He's a logistics contractor. 5 businesses, all legitimate on paper, spread across 3 states. He's been providing transport and documentation infrastructure for the network for 6 years. Rourke looked at her steadily. Voss says Carver originated the model, built the financial structure, recruited the facility operators. Voss was brought in 4 years ago because of the scale of his breeding operation. Voss was an employee, Sarah said. A well-paid one, but yes. A pause. Carver doesn't know yet that Voss has talked. Federal agents are moving on his primary business location as we speak. Rourke paused again, longer this time. Sarah, what Voss described the scope of it, this network has moved more than 600 animals across state lines in 4 years. Many of them in conditions that would not have kept them alive much longer. 600. She heard the number and let it be a number for a moment, because making it real all at once was something she'd learned not to do with things this large. And the ones at the 2 facilities, she said, the ones removed yesterday, 22 total, all in emergency veterinary care, all alive. He held her gaze. All alive, Sarah. She breathed in and out once. Okay, she said. Voss is going to enter a formal cooperation agreement. His attorney spent 40 minutes arguing for terms and then stopped arguing when the assistant DA laid out the full evidence package. Rourke's voice was dry. It's a long list. Fitch's attorney called the DA's office at 10 this morning. He's cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced charge. He was receiving payments from Carver, not Voss, directly filtered through a consulting invoice structure. He's been on Carver's payroll for 3 years. Rourke shook his head slightly, which means the board delays on the Voss complaint weren't just protecting Voss. They were protecting the whole network. Sarah thought about that, about the 11 other facilities connected to Carver, about all the complaints that might have been filed by people like her people who had seen something wrong and reported it and then waited for months while someone with a consulting invoice and a regulatory position quietly buried them. Are you looking at the other delays? She asked. The other complaints that got stalled under Fitch's tenure? Rourke looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has already thought of something and is slightly impressed to be asked about it. That investigation opens formally this afternoon. The AG's office is leading it. He paused. Merritt mentioned your name specifically when she made the recommendation. She said, and I'm quoting, "The complainant had the instincts of an investigator and the discipline of a professional. We should look at every case that touched Fitch's desk." Sarah said nothing for a moment. Then, "I just reported what I saw." "Yes," Rourke said. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" Priya called at 1:15 while Sarah was sitting in the precinct parking lot with Titan in the back and a sandwich she was making herself eat, even though she wasn't particularly hungry. "Carver's been arrested," Priya said before Sarah could speak. "I've got two sources confirming. Federal. They walked him out of his main office in front of his entire staff." A pause that had a kind of satisfied weight to it. "He's the top." "We know," Sarah said. "Voss gave him up this morning." A beat of silence. "You knew before I did." "By about 40 minutes. Priya laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the laugh of someone who has spent a week running on coffee and adrenaline and has just been given permission to feel good about it. "Okay," she said. "Okay, so it's done." "The arrest is done," Sarah said. "The rest takes time." I know the rest takes time." "But Sarah," Priya stopped, started again, and her voice was different this time. Quieter, more personal, less journalist. "You filed a complaint about a kennel. You thought you were protecting some bees, and you ended up pulling a thread that unraveled a 6-year interstate fraud network with a corrupted regulatory official and a logistics contractor in a professional intimidation operation in 600 animals." A pause. "That is not nothing." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not nothing." "How are you?" Priya asked. "Just that. Simple." Sarah thought about it honestly. Her lip was healing. The bruising on her jaw had moved through purple and was heading somewhere yellowish, which her sister had informed her was progress. She was tired in a specific way, not sleepy, but excavated, like something had moved through her at high speed and left the interior rearranged. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm genuinely okay." "Good. I want to do a full profile. On you, not the case you. Who you are, how you built Titan, why you filed the complaint. The human story inside the legal story." A pause. "When you're ready, not now, whenever." "Ask me in a month," Sarah said. "Done." She finished the sandwich. Looked at Titan in the rear view. He was watching a pigeon with the professional interest of an animal who has never once in his life needed to chase something but remains philosophically open to the concept. "We did good," she told him. He looked at the pigeon. "Hey." She waited until he shifted his gaze to the mirror. "We did good." His tail moved, once, the Titan version of a standing ovation. 2 weeks later, she stood in front of the Oversight Committee's emergency open session, newly convened, newly chaired with a third of its membership replaced pending the AG's review of Fitch-era decisions. They had asked her to speak, not as a witness in a criminal proceeding, as a member of the public who had filed a complaint that should have moved in 6 weeks and had instead become through a combination of institutional corruption and her own refusal to stop the origin point of a federal case. She had not prepared remarks. She had written some, and then set them aside because prepared remarks were for people who weren't sure what they needed to say, and she was sure. She stood at the microphone and looked at the new committee and said, "I'm a kennel supervisor. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an investigator. I'm not anyone with institutional authority or specialized legal knowledge. I'm someone who walked into a facility and saw animals in conditions that were wrong, and I reported it through the channels that exist specifically for that purpose, and then I waited. For 3 months I waited because I believed the system would do what systems are designed to do." She paused. "It didn't, because someone in this structure was being paid to make sure it didn't." One of the new committee members, a woman in her 50s, with the attentive face of someone who has spent decades listening to things that mattered, leaned forward slightly. "But here's what I want this committee to understand," Sarah continued. "The failure wasn't in the reporting process. The reporting process worked. I filed, I documented, I followed up. The failure was in the human layer between the report and the action. Someone chose to place their financial interest above the purpose of this board. And that choice, one person's choice, cost 22 animals 5 additional months in conditions that nearly killed them. And it cost me an alley and a hand around my throat." She looked steadily at the committee. "So when you rebuild this process, and I know you're rebuilding it, I want you to think about the people who file reports and then disappear into silence, who are while the system decides whether to care. Build something that can't be quietly redirected. Build something that can't be sold. Silence in the chamber when she finished. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that means something has been heard. The committee chair said, "Ms. Caldwell, thank you." She stepped back from the microphone. Titan was at her left side. She'd been granted special permission to bring him a fact that Rourke had made happen with a single phone call that she suspected was technically outside his jurisdiction and that he had made anyway. He pressed against her leg as she stepped back, and she put her hand on his head briefly before they walked back to their seat. Marcus was in the third row. He had come because she'd told him what he'd done that night, standing at the end of an alley with a phone already dialing, had mattered, and he'd said, "I walk that route every night. I'm not doing anything special." And she'd said, "That is exactly why it mattered." And he hadn't had an answer for that. Her sister Dana was beside him, which was not something Sarah had arranged, but which did not surprise her. She sat down. The committee moved on to its next agenda item. The world continued its business of proceeding. She thought about the 14 seconds. She thought about the way she'd stood in the same month, 3 months ago, outside a fence line taking photographs on her phone of things she couldn't unsee, and the way she'd sat in her car afterward and written down what Voss had said to her word for word, because she'd understood without being able to explain why, without proof, without any reassurance that she was right, that she would need it. She thought about every morning she'd driven to work since the complaint was filed and felt the weight of it, the uncertainty, the silence from the board, the note on her windshield, the calls with no one on the other end, the daily decision to keep going that looked from the outside like nothing like routine, like a woman driving to work, but from the inside felt like carrying something heavy over difficult ground without knowing how much farther the ground went. She had kept going, not because she was brave in any dramatic sense, not because she was without fear, but because she had looked at the thing that needed doing and looked at herself and concluded with the same plain-spoken practicality she applied to everything that she was capable of doing it, and that the cost of not doing it was higher than the cost of being afraid. That was all it had been. And that had been enough. The session ended. People moved. Marcus appeared at her elbow and said, "You want to get lunch?" in the tone of someone offering something ordinary on purpose as an antidote to the extraordinary, and she said yes immediately because that was exactly what she wanted. Outside, the air hit her. She stopped for a moment on the steps. Titan sat beside her without being asked. They had done this pause, this breath before moving 10,000 times. She looked out at the street, ordinary, moving, indifferent the way cities are indifferent. She breathed in, breathed out. Every dog at those facilities who was alive and recovering, alive because she had filed one complaint on one afternoon and then refused to let it be buried, was somewhere warm tonight and in someone's care, eating food that wasn't rationed and sleeping without fear. Every complaint stalled under Fitch's tenure was being re-examined by a team that had no financial reason to slow it down. Lewis Carver was in federal custody. Derek Voss was cooperating with investigators who now had everything. And Sarah Caldwell was standing on the steps of a public building in the ordinary afternoon light, with her dog beside her and her neighbor offering her lunch, and the split lip had healed, and her throat no longer ached, and her hands were completely, absolutely steady. She looked down at Titan. He looked back at her, those dark, direct eyes that had never once communicated anything she could confuse for doubt. "Okay," she said to him, "let's go." She walked down the steps and into the afternoon, and the thing that had tried to silence her was silent now, and she was not.